Hi and welcome to the DTA screencast covering the social cultural issues for the summer work. So let's get started straight away. What we're going to be looking at in this section here is physical activity, which is usually the first section in the AS section. So what we actually need to know by the end of this section is to understand what physical activity is and to understand the different characteristics and examples of physical activity as well as the benefits of taking part. So let's get started straight away. So if you had to think of loads of different examples of physical activity, probably think of swimming, football, just try and think of a few others. Tennis maybe, maybe aerobics, walking, jogging, or even outdoor adventures activity. So the thing that you'll notice straight away is the first three there are all sports. Alright, now this is what happens most of the time when people are thinking about physical activity and they're giving their examples in their exam, is they come up with sports as opposed to physical activity. So let's have a look at that. So the definition of physical activity is principally anything that gets the body moving, and an umbrella term. So any of those activities that we previously looked at, those ones there, are getting the body moving more than it normally would do. So therefore they fall under the umbrella of physical activity. So one of the ways that we can determine the differences in physical activity is by the level of organisation. So we're just going to look at that. So if there are some examples here, and the main categories that the specification puts them into are these ones here: play, sport, physical education, outdoor education, physical rec and outdoor rec. So by looking at the level of organisation of these, we can actually differentiate between them. So let's have a look. So physical recreation, obviously it's a physical activity, and this concept of recreation. So what we've got to have is something that is participation but not really of a high standard, and it's actually about taking part and it's done for its own sake, therefore just the enjoyment. Interesting here, it can actually be organised, but that doesn't mean to say it has to be highly organised. Done for its own sake, can be done by anybody. There's no media involvement, obviously. It can be done at any time and usually in any area. So if we looked at these activities here, we can easily turn around and say, well, yes, they're swimming, but would you say that that's sport? Not really, because it's recreation. It's just taking part. It's not really winning. Nobody's particularly having a race. But if they were having a race, it can be competitive, but it's not the most important thing. So you would say these guys here are playing football, but there's no real kit there, there's no sort of like goalpost, there's no stadium, so you would say that that's not very competitive. Okay, so let's compare that against sport. And this might be one of the questions that they ask you, is compare one against the other. So one of them is sport, one is rec. So looking at those two images there, you can see this is taking part, not the winning that's really involved, and it's done for its own sake, so they're looking to just enjoy. But where in this one here, you can see just from this image alone that it's slightly more organised and competitive. For example, they've got the same strip on, you've got a bench there, so it's organised teams. Looks like a high quality pitch comparatively to that one there. So let's go back to our swimming example. As we said, it can be competitive, but it's not the ultimate goal. So you could probably see some kids down there, you can imagine that they'd be racing. There's clearly no media involved around that swimming pool. But if you looked at this image, you could argue that this guy here has got some real physical attributes. It looks like his technique is very good, and that's needed to actually take part in sport. If you think about any high level sport, you do need to have that physical competency and therefore a level of commitment. You can't just turn up without putting in loads of training to become a world champ. And also there's usually media involved. So this is comparing sport versus recreation. So very quickly looking at the characteristics of sport. We said it's organised, competitive. You need to have the skill and the physical prowess. The concept of commitment, as we mentioned about the training that you'd have to do, sense of fair play, but it's in a designated time and place, and I think these two here are really, really important. So you can't just do it whenever it's at 3 o'clock on a Saturday for a football match, or it's a Wednesday at 3 o'clock for a rugby match for college. They do have rules and they're adhered to, in other words followed. Usually has officials, very surprised if it doesn't, and there is usually media involvement. Alright, so an exam type question, a very quick one for you. See if you can define sport. So pause the screencast, have a go at the question, and I'll join you in a minute. Okay, so hopefully what you did was picked out 3 of those characteristics of sport and then put them into this sort of format. It's only 3 marks, so we're not asking a great deal of detail, but it's got to be accurate. So let's have a look. Sport is played competitively. Okay, we're happy with that. Pre-arranged time. Good. There has to be rules and an element of skill. So you've given 4 different points there, which is fine. Good thing about this answer here is, for example, in school you may complete or compete even in house athletics in 100 meters. That there is giving us a really good example, a specific example, saying the 100 meters, not just saying house athletics. This is competitive and at a pre-arranged time with rules, so a good solid answer, or you're guaranteed to get your 3 marks there. Alright, let's move on. So the other sections that we need to know the characteristics of were outdoor recreation. So this one is very similar to the recreation that we had before, but this one we're now talking about going into the outdoors, so instead of in a sports hall. So there are no rules or officials, no winners. There's a code of etiquette as there is before, and it's played for its own sake. But with this one there are 3 key points. It's this appreciation of the natural environment, and therefore a respect of the natural environment, and this sense of adventure. And that's where the difference is between the recreation we talked about before. Alright, so let's just have a look at those in a little bit more detail. So for the appreciation of the natural environment, we're talking about this beauty or stunning rural areas. These are the examples we can use. Simplicity of that sense of feeling back to nature, and that self-expression and a sense of awareness of self comparatively to our environment. Some say as well that there's this sense of spirituality, this inner feeling, so you can gather your own thoughts, so to speak. Now, an interesting one is this idea of adventure, risk, and self-reliance when we're in the natural environment. It's this sense of thrill-seeking, which is a massive industry. But let's have a look at these 3 pictures here. They look quite risky. Now, is there actual real risk involved in those 3 things? Let's say, for example, that's go ape, skiing, and this is obviously rock climbing. Real risk involved in each one of these 3. Or is it perceived risk? Because if you think about it, rock climbers, they have the helmet, the ropes, the harnesses, the shoes, and they have to be very competent at what they do. Skiing as well, there's quite a lot of safety equipment involved, and particularly for something like go ape, or that type of activity, there are harnesses and safety regulations that they have to go through. So it might actually just be perceived risk. So it's somewhere usually between these 2 that you will find your activity. Let's say, for example, you're doing Duke of Edinburgh. Is there real risk or is it perceived? And what you need to show the examiner is that you're aware of the perception or the real risk that's involved in outdoor adventures activities. Okay, our last 2 sections here is physical education. This is about learning about and through physical activity. But a better definition is this: learning physical, personal, preparatory and qualitative values through formal physical activity. Bit of a mouthful, I know. So let's just have a look at what they would be. So in layperson's terms, it's taking part in physical activity, developing your social skills through teamwork, for example, preparing for a balanced and active healthy lifestyle is your preparatory, and then your formal would be the higher education through qualification. In other words, your GCSEs or your A levels. And then lastly is your outdoor education. Definition: learning in and about the outdoors as part of a structured physical education program. Fine. So here are the characteristics: done in the natural environment, part of a planned activity, but really important points are here. Has to have designated qualified staff, part of a physical education program, but adheres to really strict health and safety guidelines. Okay, so what type of questions are we going to get around these areas? And that in itself is the important point. It's usually going to be around the benefits and drawbacks of each one of these types of activity. So let's have a look at one of the questions that's from the specification. School children in the United Kingdom experience physical education as part of the curriculum. Identify the values that can be gained from physical education in school. Asking for 5 marks. So we know that we need to make 5 points. Key thing there, it says identify the values. So what does it mean by values? What I want you to do is write down what you think the values are that you would gain from taking part in your national curriculum, PE. Okay, I'll pause the screencast here and then we'll see what you've come up with as an answer. Okay, so welcome back. Let's have a look and see what they've come up with as their answer. So they've come up with teamwork, this sense of sportsmanship, some kind of leadership, you can actually develop that. Element of creativity, that could be through developing a new move within gymnastics or dance or something that you perform on the pitch. It's also considered to be quite a relaxant. In other words, by taking part in physical activity, you're relieving stress. And then it's supposed to be, and hopefully it has been, enjoyable. So all of these are the characteristics, the benefits that you would get if you were taking part in a physical education program. Alright, so your final question is this one. Explain each of the 3 concepts, play, physical rec and sport, in terms of the characteristics and the associated values. So we've just looked at what the values are. So what we're understanding from that now hopefully is that these are the benefits. So fast forward to this, we need to then show the examiner what the benefits of play, physical rec and sport. We've also got to identify the characteristics as well, because that's what it's asking for. A little bit further detailed because it's asking for an explanation. Alright, so that's what I need you to do for your 10 marker, and we'll speak again soon. Thanks very much.